I still remember the exact words my father said when I told him where the wedding was going to be. He said, "You're an embarrassment to this family."
Just like that.
No hesitation. No attempt to understand. Just a cold sentence that hit harder than I ever imagined. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. See, I decided to hold my wedding at the place most people would never consider, a nursing home. Not because I wanted pity, not because I lacked options, but because my grandfather, who raised me when my own parents barely cared, couldn't leave his bed. He couldn't travel. So, I brought the celebration to him. And for that, my entire family refused to come. When I called them, trying to explain, I got laughed at.
My mom didn't even speak.
My uncle said, "What are we supposed to wear? Hospital gowns." My cousin Amanda joked in the family group chat that maybe I'd serve Jell-O instead of cake. That night, I cried myself to sleep in my apartment. Not because they weren't coming, but because the people who were supposed to love me the most treated my love for the man who raised me like it was a joke. But I still went ahead with it. I had Ethan by my side, my fiancé, my anchor, and my grandfather, Arthur, was all dressed up in his old army uniform, waiting in the garden with the biggest smile I'd seen on him in years. I walked down the aisle, through rows of blooming lilies, for poles hidden behind curtains, soft violin music playing from a Bluetooth speaker. And halfway through my walk, I heard it. Laughter. I turned and there they were. My father, my stepmother, my relatives. They actually showed up just to mock me. "You really did it, huh?" My dad sneered from the back. "A wedding at a hospice center. What next? Honeymoon in the..." I didn't say a word. I just kept walking. I wasn't going to let them ruin this moment for me. But they weren't done. Right before the vows, my father walked right up to the front and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Your grandfather doesn't even remember your name, Claire. You're doing all this for someone who's not even aware." And I almost broke. But then something happened I never expected. My grandfather, who hadn't stood without help in months, grabbed the side of his wheelchair and stood. No one moved. No one spoke. And he looked my father dead in the eye and said, "I remember her name. Claire Elise Reed. I remember her feeding me, sleeping next to me after every stroke. I remember every sacrifice she made for me. And I remember the day you sold your rights as my son for $40,000. The room went dead silent. Then he pulled out a letter. A legal document. One I had never even seen. He handed it to the priest and said, "Read it." And that's when everything flipped. The letter said that my father gave up all rights to my grandfather's estate. Years ago. For money. And then Grandpa looked at me, his eyes full of pride, and said, "Everything I have now, every share, every property, every dime, it belongs to Claire." But it didn't stop there. He turned to Ethan, my husband, and said, "And to those wondering who Ethan is, he's not just a good man. He's the CEO of Hawthorne Solutions." My dad went pale. The same company he had been begging to invest in his failing project was run by my husband. And just like that, every person who laughed at me,
they fell
silent. After that moment, after my grandfather exposed the truth and stood taller than any man in that room, you could feel the atmosphere change. Every smirk vanished. Every smug glance turned to quiet panic. My dad just stood there, his mouth slightly open, eyes darting between the will in the priest's hands and Grandpa, who hadn't sat down yet. My Uncle Doug? He tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Arthur, you can't be serious." But Grandpa didn't even look at him. He turned to me instead and gently said, "You can begin your vows now, sweetheart. They've already said theirs, with their actions." I'll never forget that line. Ever. Ethan squeezed my hand. My heart was beating out of my chest, not from nerves, but from this mix of heartbreak and victory that I never knew could coexist. And so we finished the ceremony. We read our vows. I barely held it together. I could feel the tears threatening to spill every time I glanced at Grandpa, who had sat back down but never took his eyes off me. We kissed. And that's when things got weird. Because suddenly, all the people who mocked me an hour earlier, they wanted to take photos. Shake hands. It was such a beautiful ceremony, Amanda said, like she hadn't laughed in my face 2 nights ago. Doug tried to joke with Ethan. You're quite the catch, huh? And my father had the audacity to pull me aside, put his hand on my shoulder, and say, let's talk. Privately. I stared at him for a second. Now you want to talk? He gave this forced chuckle. I just think we should put everything behind us. You've done well, Claire. Really well. Let's not dwell on the past. I mean, family is family, right? And I smiled. I smiled the way you do when you've been slapped so many times that you don't even feel it anymore. You just start watching the pattern. I said, you're right. Family is family. That's why I chose the only one who never left me. His face hardened. I'm still your father. I nodded. And you're still the man who sold your father for $40,000. He didn't say anything after that. Just stood there, jaw tight, fists tighter. But here's the thing they didn't know. The will? That was only part of it. What Grandpa never told anyone, not even me, was what he had quietly been building. Behind the scenes. While they all assumed he was just some fading old man. After the cake was cut and guests were mingling, one of Grandpa's old friends, Mr. Halden, approached me. I barely knew the guy. All I knew was he used to be some kind of consultant. He pulled me aside and said, you're not just inheriting a home, Claire. Arthur and I bought 12 acres of land 10 years ago. It's about to be rezoned into commercial space. You own it now. And let's just say, your cousins will never be able to afford even an inch of it. My jaw nearly hit the floor. I looked over at Grandpa. He was watching from his chair, sipping a glass of watered-down champagne, eyes glinting with pride. This man, this humble, wheelchair-bound veteran, had just handed me a future. Not out of revenge, not to make anyone jealous, but because he believed in me more than anyone else ever had. Later that evening, Ethan and I sat beside him in his room. No music, no crowd, just the 3 of us. I asked him why he never told me about the land, about the inheritance, about the shares. He smiled. Because I wanted you to choose kindness first. Not money, not revenge, just heart. And you did. That's why you deserved it. The wedding was over, but the real storm had just begun. Barely 3 days after our ceremony, I got a letter. A formal one. From a lawyer. Apparently, my father and Uncle Doug had decided to contest my grandfather's will. Their argument? Arthur Reed was not of sound mind when he amended the documents. He was emotionally manipulated by his granddaughter, Claire Reed. Manipulated. The word cut through me like glass. I sat on the floor, the letter in my lap, shaking with disbelief. Ethan came over, read the whole thing in silence, and then just whispered, they're afraid. That's all this is. Fear disguised as family. I nodded, but something in me snapped. Not in a loud way. Not in a dramatic breakdown. No, this was quiet. Cold. Final. I wasn't going to cry this time. I had cried enough for them. That same week, my grandfather had to be taken to the hospital. Stress. High blood pressure. The very thing I was trying to protect him from was what they were now weaponizing. And yet, even in his hospital bed, Grandpa told me, don't fight them out of anger. Fight them to protect what's right. So I did. I hired a lawyer. A good one. And when the court date came, I walked in. Not as the girl they mocked, not as the quiet little embarrassment who held her wedding in a nursing home, but as the legal heir of Arthur Reed, ready to speak. The courtroom was colder than I expected. My father avoided eye contact. Doug looked confident, too confident. Amanda sat behind them, flipping through her phone like this was some kind of annoying errand. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly and said, I didn't manipulate my grandfather. I honored him. I chose love over appearances. And if that makes me guilty of something, then I stand by it. The judge listened. The documents were solid. Witnesses, including Grandpa's doctors and the priest from our wedding, testified that Arthur was perfectly coherent when he signed the amendment. Even the notary confirmed everything. Their case fell apart. And when the ruling came, the judge said something I'll never forget. There is no evidence of coercion. There is only evidence of integrity, care, and unconditional love. My father turned red. Doug stood up and stormed out before the judge even finished. But even after winning, it didn't feel like a win. Because they still didn't get it. They thought it was about the money. It was never about the money. That night, I sat with Ethan and looked over the property deeds, the stock portfolios, the savings accounts that now had my name on them. All of it. I could have shut the door on all of them. Blocked their numbers. Cut them out for good. Kept everything.
Cold.
Final. End of story. But then I remembered something Grandpa once told me when I was a little girl crying over being picked last at school. He said, "Sometimes the best revenge is letting them see you shine without needing to strike back." So instead of cutting them off completely, I sent them letters. Not cruel ones. Not dramatic ones. Just short, handwritten notes that said, "You made your choices. I made mine. I wish you peace. Claire." About 2 weeks after the court ruling, I was settling into a strange new rhythm. Not rich. Not famous. Just suddenly responsible for things I'd never even imagined. Land contracts, legal documents, investment meetings. Grandpa was recovering slowly, but the toll from all that stress wasn't something that just vanished. And then one night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Claire? It was Amanda, my cousin. The same Amanda who laughed when I chose the nursing home. The one who called me the granddaughter of a vegetable at Thanksgiving the year before. My first instinct was to hang up, but then I heard her voice crack. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. Please. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence push her forward. It wasn't just about the wedding.
Or Grandpa.
They hated him long before that. I didn't know the whole truth until after court. But, Claire, your dad has been lying to all of us for decades. My heart stopped. She kept talking. Apparently, years ago, when my mom and dad were going through financial trouble, Grandpa had offered to help. Not with money, but with conditions. He wanted them to fix their marriage. Go to counseling. Get clean. Especially my dad, who had started gambling. A lot. But my father didn't take that well. Instead, he manipulated the story. Told the rest of the family that Grandpa refused to help them. That he was cold. Selfish.
Controlling.
It spread like wildfire. And, because no one wanted to admit they were broke, they all believed the lie. It was easier than facing the truth. Amanda's voice broke completely. He poisoned us against him. And now I see it. And I feel disgusting for what I said at your wedding. I'm sorry. I sat there absolutely still. Because even though I had felt for years that something wasn't adding up, hearing it spoken out loud like this, from her, it shattered me. And it lit a new fire. I didn't tell Grandpa immediately. His heart was still fragile, and I didn't want to risk another health scare. But I told Ethan. And he looked at me and said something that sealed my next decision. Claire, you're the one holding the family's truth now. The question is, what do you want to do with it? I had the truth. I had the power. I had the proof. Amanda even sent me emails between her and my father, emails that revealed they planned to fake concern during the wedding just in case Grandpa mentioned his will. It was never about showing support. It was always about chasing the money. A week later, I invited Amanda to meet me, alone. We sat at this small cafe near the park Grandpa, and I used to walk in when I was a kid. She looked nervous. Ashamed. I think part of her expected me to scream at her. Instead, I slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were printed copies of all the inheritance paperwork and the letter Grandpa wrote me on the morning of my wedding. She opened it, started reading, and started crying. And I said, "You want redemption? Start by helping me tell the truth. Not to destroy them, but to clear his name." I'll never forget the look on my father's face when I showed up at his office unannounced. He was mid-call, probably trying to charm another investor. His secretary looked startled when I walked past her, without saying a word. But I didn't care. He saw me through the glass and instantly went stiff. "Claire," he said, forcing a smile. "This is unexpected." I dropped a folder on his desk. "I know everything. About the lies. The gambling. How you turned everyone against Grandpa to cover up your own shame." His face darkened. "Where did you hear that?" "Amanda," I said. "And the emails. And, I just listened. Something you never did." He leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing. "So what? You're here for revenge? You want to gloat?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who once towered over my world, whose approval I begged for as a child. This man who left me to be raised by someone he called senile trash, was nothing but a scared, aging man with a crumbling legacy and a hollow name. "No," I said. "I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to give you one final truth." And I walked away. That afternoon, I drove straight to Grandpa's room. He looked stronger, eyes clearer. The color in his face had returned, and he was sipping tea while reading one of his war memoirs. I sat beside him, quietly for a moment. Then I told him everything. About Amanda, the emails, the lies, the past. He didn't say anything for a long time, just looked out the window. Then he said, "I always knew he resented me, but hearing it still hurts." I reached for his hand. "I know." Then I said, "There's one more thing." He looked at me. "I've decided what to do with the land." He raised an eyebrow. "You're selling it?" I shook my head.
No.
"I'm building something. In your name." He looked confused. I smiled. "I'm starting the Arthur Reed Foundation, a nonprofit that helps elderly veterans find safe housing, nurses,
Care. Dignity.
It'll be built on the same land you bought with Mr. Halden. I'm not cashing it in for condos or luxury buildings. I'm turning it into something that lasts. Something that reflects what you actually stood for." His eyes welled up. He reached for my hand, squeezing it tighter than I thought he could. "Claire," he whispered, "you're the legacy I never saw coming." The news spread. And just like before, the same relatives who mocked me came crawling back. But this time, there was nothing to fight over. No court case. No inheritance to steal. Only something they couldn't touch. Purpose. Because while they were chasing money, I was building something real. Ethan and I went on to run the foundation together. We got calls from mayors, features in magazines, veterans' families writing in to thank us. None of that mattered more than watching Grandpa's eyes light up when we showed him the final blueprints. And when he passed, we didn't hold the funeral in a fancy church or a gilded hall. We held it in the very garden where I said my vows, where he stood for me when no one else would. So if you're still listening to my story, if you're someone who's ever been mocked for doing what felt right instead of what looked perfect, remember this. Sometimes the people who laugh the loudest at your choices are the ones who fear your strength the most. And sometimes, choosing kindness when you could have chosen revenge is the most powerful legacy you'll ever leave behind.